I'd now like to turn the call over to our first speaker, Pamela Gowdy, Senior Product Manager for GuideStar. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon or morning, respectively, everyone. We're glad that you could join us today. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As earlier mentioned, the deck and materials that you see today will be distributed after the session, so look for a message from GuideStar in your inbox in the next 48 hours or so. Right behind that, some folks did submit questions in advance, and we thank you very much for your prescience in doing so. We've done our best to tweak the content of today's session accordingly to address those questions where relevant. So, again, our thanks for that. Number 3, a lot of what you're going to be seeing when I jump into our online demonstration of Charity Check later in the session, you're actually going to see an integration with another product of ours, which is known as GuideStar Premium. Those are 2 freestanding products, and I'll talk more about that later, but just a preliminary heads up that we will be hosting an hour-long session specifically on GuideStar Premium. That will be a webinar taking place on April 21st. So we'd love to see you there, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So with that in mind, I want to introduce today's facilitators. Mr. Scott Menzel, who is our Manager of Customer Experience here at GuideStar. He's actually going to be manning the Q&A log, so as you're submitting questions, he'll be reviewing those and funneling those to Susie and I for hopefully discourse downstream. Scott is very much our evangelist and customer advocate. We want and need to hear your feedback to inform future product iterations, so please be sure to share your feedback either today, after the session, or in the coming weeks and months. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Pam Gowdy, Senior Product Manager, really in charge of developing next-generation products and services to meet the needs of a very broad constituency of GuideStar users. And last but certainly not least, I'm really pleased to introduce Suzanne Ross McDowell. Susie is a partner at Steptoe & Johnson and brings a wealth of background and experience, especially in the exempt organization space, to the table. We're very pleased to have her here today. Susie, thanks for joining us. There's a lot we will learn from her this afternoon. So before we jump into the meat of the session, I want to go ahead and open up a polling question to get a better handle on this tenor and flavor of the group today, and so that you can learn a little bit about each other as peers. So you'll see 3 polling questions that are open. I'm not actually going to read each one of them, but I'm going to sit silently here so you have a moment to ingest and respond to each one of them. And we thank you for participating. It's really going to help us out to get to the balance of the session. Just a reminder, as you answer your questions, please be sure to hit the Submit button at the bottom right hand of that pop-up window. And while you're answering those questions, I see some chatter coming in about material availability, and again, those materials will be made available after today's session. And just another housekeeping item, if you do notice some static on your line, that's a known technical issue that we are working to resolve. So thank you for your patience with that as well. Okay, WebEx has closed the poll, so we should be able to look at some real-time results here momentarily. Thanks again for taking the time to navigate through those 3 questions. Okay, so some very interesting results here. The first question about general levels of familiarity with the revenue procedure that was issued last June. It looks like, wow, upwards of 60% are not at all familiar with them. So the good news is Susie's going to speak about that. I'm going to cover off on that topic as well. The second question has to do with IRS proposed regs out there concerning Type 3 non-functionally integrated SOs. And again, it looks like there's some opportunity to gain some knowledge on that topic. Susie's going to talk a bit about that. And lastly, the question of OFAC. It looks like there's a higher level of familiarity with the concept and practice of OFAC, but certainly some room for education. So hopefully we've balanced our content pretty closely with what we gauged from this poll. So thanks again for taking the time to participate. Much appreciated. So today's objectives, we're going to talk a bit about the Internal Revenue Code, and Susie's going to help us navigate through the Pension Protection Act, impacts to supporting organizations and your grant-making process, and really help us understand the different types of SOs and their interrelationship. Byproduct of that will be a nice discussion on best practices out there related to due diligence. I'm then going to talk more specifically about charity checks and perhaps how it may align well with the jobs that you need to do as grantors. And then certainly we're going to address on some common participant questions submitted in advance, and then look at some of the Q&A log as it grows during the balance of today's session. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Susie, and she'll get you started on the Internal Revenue Code and implications of the Pension Protection Act. Susie?
Thanks very much, Pam. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. And happy St. Patrick's Day as well. I am going to split my comments into two main sections. I will start with a summary of the Pension Protection Act provisions that affect grants to supporting organizations. The Pension Protection Act was a very large bill, but we're going to focus just on this one part today. And then after summarizing the changes made by this act, I'll show you step by step what actions you need to take in order to comply with those provisions and make sure that you don't end up being inadvertently penalized for failing to understand them. So the provisions that we're talking about today really deal with two separate areas. One is private foundation grants to certain supporting organizations, and the other is donor-advised funds grants to certain supporting organizations. In the case of private foundations, the Pension Protection Act made changes that provide that grants to certain types of supporting organizations do not count towards a private foundation's minimum distribution requirement, or what's sometimes called its payout requirement. And if a private foundation fails to meet its payout requirement, it is then subject to a penalty excise tax of 30% on the shortfall and must correct the error. So this is something that can have serious ramifications. Additionally, grants to certain types of supporting organizations made by private foundations require expenditure responsibility. And in this case, the penalty for failure to comply is 20% of the grant on the foundation. That's the penalty on the foundation. And potentially a 5% penalty on directors and officers. In addition, you need to make correction. Now, you'll notice I said certain supporting organizations, so we'll be talking about which are the supporting organizations that you need to be aware of when you're making grants as we get into the session this afternoon. With respect to donor-advised funds, grants to certain supporting organizations require expenditure responsibility, and as with private foundations, the penalty for failure to comply is 20% of the grant, and that penalty falls on the sponsor of the donor-advised fund, which might, for example, be a community foundation. So let's start off with what is a supporting organization. And this is a little bit technical, but bear with me. The Internal Revenue Code provides that all 501c3 organizations are either private foundations or public charities. Private foundations are subject to greater regulation than public charities, so generally it's considered a good thing to be a public charity. Public charities include three general areas. The first is schools, hospitals, churches, and government units. The second is organizations that meet specific requirements for broad public support. And then the third is supporting organizations, which I'm abbreviating here as SOs, and they are described in Section 509A3 of the Internal Revenue Code. If a 501c3 organization does not fall in one of these three categories, it has been classified as a private foundation. So, a supporting organization is a 501c3 organization, which is classified as a public charity because it has a specified relationship with another public charity, which is referred to in this context as the supported organization. So a supporting organization supports a public charity. The Internal Revenue Code describes three types of different relationships that will qualify an organization as a supporting organization. Type 1 we refer to as a parent-subsidiary organization. That's a situation where the public charity, for example, a university or a hospital, controls the subsidiary supporting organization. Type 2 we refer to as a brother-sister relationship. That's a situation where the public charity and the supporting organization have overlapping boards, and because directors of the public charity also sit on the supporting organization will be responsive to the concerns of the public charity that it supports. Type 3 is an organization that is operated in connection with one or more public charities. This relationship is a little bit more nebulous than the other two, but is defined in more detail in the Internal Revenue Code regulations. Type 3 supporting organizations are of two types. One is functionally integrated, and the other is not functionally integrated. We will be talking more about what this means, but you'll see that it is a very important distinction because a Type 3 supporting organization which is not functionally integrated is going to give rise to requirements for expenditure responsibility and will not count towards a private foundation's payout requirement. So I've kind of jumped ahead into the next slide. Which supporting organizations require expenditure responsibility? First, Type 3 non-functionally integrated supporting organizations will always require expenditure responsibility. Other supporting organizations will require expenditure responsibility if, in the case of a private foundation, a disqualified person of the foundation that's making the grant to the supporting organization directly or indirectly controls the supporting organization or supported organization. So that would be a situation where, say, a substantial contributor to the foundation controls the supporting organization or the public charity that is supported and to which the foundation is making a grant. Similarly, in the case of donor-advised funds, if a donor to the donor-advised fund or a person designated by the donor to advise with respect to distributions directly or indirectly controls a supported organization, that grant is also going to require expenditure responsibility. So what is expenditure responsibility? Again, as is always the case, it seems, with tax law, there are detailed regulations under the Internal Revenue Code that explain this. But just to give you the general idea, expenditure responsibility is a series of procedures that are designed to ensure that private foundation funds are used for exclusively charitable purposes. And they involve several steps that are not necessary when making grants to other 501c3 organizations that are public charities or are Type 1 or Type 2 supporting organizations. First, you need to have a pre-grant inquiry, gather a certain amount of information before even making the grant. Then you need to have a written grant agreement with the grantee. The grantee is required to keep the funds that are received as part of the grant separate from its non-charitable funds. The grantee must provide regular reports to the private foundation, and then the private foundation must report to the IRS on its Form 990-PF that the expenditure responsibility requirements have been met. So it's quite a bit of additional responsibility compared to a grant to a public charity that is not subject to these types of requirements. Now, which grants do not count towards a private foundation's minimum distribution? These are grants to Type 3, non-functionally integrated supporting organizations, and all other supporting organizations if a disqualified person of the foundation making a grant to the supporting organization directly or indirectly controls the supporting organization or supported organization. So what the IRS is saying here is that if someone in a position of influence with the foundation that's making the grant to the supporting organization controls the supporting organization or supported organization, that grant is not going to count towards the foundation's minimum payout. The grant can still be made, but it won't count towards that 5% payout. A very difficult question in this area is when does a person have control? There is no IRS guidance that provides a clear method for determining whether control exists. In Notice 2006-109, the IRS stated that control exists when one or more disqualified persons or donors may, by aggregating their votes or positions of authority, require the supporting organization or the supported organization to make an expenditure or prevent those organizations from making an expenditure. So, for example, let's say we have the Jones Family Foundation, and the Jones Family Foundation is thinking about making a grant to the XYZ supporting organization. The XYZ supporting organization has 5 directors, and 3 of those directors are members of the Jones family and are therefore disqualified persons with respect to the Jones Family Foundation. That is a simple explanation of a control situation. In practice, many situations may arise where it is not as clear-cut that the disqualified persons or donors have control, and note that it includes indirect control as well as direct control, and it's not exactly clear what that means. Moving to another definitional question. I've mentioned that Type 3 supporting organizations that are not functionally integrated require expenditure responsibility, and grants to those organizations do not count towards the private foundation's minimum payout. Well, what is a Type 3 supporting organization that is functionally integrated, that does not give you such problems? In 2006, the IRS issued Notice 2006-109, and then last fall, the IRS issued proposed regulations. These are the regulations that were referenced in the questions that we asked in the beginning of this session. So now we're in a little bit of a limbo situation because we've got Notice 2006-109. We also have proposed regulations. At some point in the future, we will have final regulations, but until then, the IRS has said that you can rely on the definition in either one. So if you've already acted in reliance on the definition under Notice 2006-109, that is okay for now. The notice provided that a supporting organization is functionally integrated when the activities that it engages in for or on behalf of a supported organization are activities to perform the functions of or carry out the purposes of such organization, and but for the involvement of the supporting organization, these activities would normally be engaged in by the supported organizations themselves. So this is a situation where the supporting organization is engaging in activities that the supported organization would likely be engaging in itself if not for the supporting organization. The proposed regulations have a somewhat different definition. They provide that a supporting organization is functionally integrated if it engages in activities substantially all of which directly further the exempt purposes of the supported organization by performing the functions of or carrying out the purposes of the supported organization, and but for the involvement of the supporting organization would normally be engaged in by the supported organization. The proposed regulations give a couple examples. They say that a supporting organization that owns and manages exempt use property will be treated as functionally integrated. So if, for example, you have a hospital and a supporting organization owns property, owns the hospital building itself, that would be functionally integrated. On the other hand, the proposed regulations provide that fundraising or managing non-exempt use property, such as investment property, for a supported organization is not considered functionally integrated. Some public charities create a separate entity to manage their fundraising or to manage their investments, particularly real estate investments, and the proposed regulations provide that these supporting organizations would not be treated as functionally integrated. Of course, all of these rules may change when the regulations are finalized. The IRS is now receiving comments on the regulations. And then there are some special rules for hospitals and governmental units. So that's a very brief summary of a pretty complex subject to give you the background on what the law requires. Now, many of you are working for private foundations or sponsors of donor-advised funds, and so your question is, well, what do I do in my day-to-day operations to make sure that I don't become subject to excise taxes for failing to exercise expenditure responsibility, or as a private foundation because I made a grant thinking that it counted towards my payout requirement, and then I failed to meet my payout requirement. I'm going to go step by step with you through what you need to do. The first step is to determine if your potential grantee is a 501c3 organization. Now, the way you do this is you can look at the grantee's IRS determination letter, and that will tell you if the potential grantee is a 501c3. But it only tells you that it's a 501c3 as of the date that letter was issued, and things may have changed. So in addition, you need to look in IRS Pub number 78, which is put out quarterly and also has weekly updates in the Internal Revenue Bulletin to make sure that the organization's exempt status or status as a 501c3 organization has not been revoked. Now, if you do this and you find out that the grantee is not a 501c3 organization, that's going to require that you exercise, in the case of a private foundation, expenditure responsibility. In the case of a donor-advised fund, there's special rules, but it will require some additional due diligence. But those rules are not new to the Pension Protection Act of 2006. If the grantee is a 501c3 organization, then you need to determine if it's a supporting organization, because, as we've discussed, depending upon the type of supporting organization that it is, you may have to engage in some extra due diligence. How do you determine if a potential grantee is a supporting organization? There are two approved methods. One, you look at the IRS determination letter. If it says it's a 509A1 or a 509A2 organization, it's not a supporting organization. You just have a regular 501c3. If the determination letter says it's a 509A3 organization, then you know it's a supporting organization. You don't know what type, but you know it's a supporting organization, and you know you need to continue your inquiry. The problem with the determination letter is that some of them may be silent as to the section under which an organization is treated as a public charity. In that case, you need to turn to the IRS Business Master File. And you can either access the Business Master File directly yourself, although if you do, I think you'll find it is not at all user-friendly. It was not developed with the expectation that the public would use it. And so the IRS provided in RevProc 2009-32 that you can access the BMF data through a third party such as GuideStar. And Pam will be talking about how you can do that through GuideStar. So if you determine your grantee is not a supporting organization, you can go ahead and make the grant. There are no new rules under the Pension Protection Act. If the grantee is a supporting organization, you then need to go to step 3 and determine what type of supporting organization your potential grantee is. So turning now to slide 19, there are 3 different methods that you can use. Method 1 is you look at the IRS determination letter. Very few determination letters will tell you what type of supporting organization an organization is. Prior to 2006, there was no need to know this. In February of 2007, the IRS suspended issuance of determination letters on functionally integrated status. So then we had another lack of data there. They're now issuing determination letters under the proposed regulations definition. In doing your due diligence now, you can continue to rely on a determination letter that states that a 501c3 organization is functionally integrated if it was issued prior to February 22nd, 2007 under the advance notice of proposed rulemaking. And you can rely on that until the proposed regulations become final or temporary, and as long as that supporting organization meets the requirements of either the ANPRM or the proposed regulations. Method 2 is a reasoned written opinion of counsel of the private foundation or of the donor advised fund. The main thing to notice here is that it needs to be a reasoned opinion. So if you go this route, counsel needs to explain counsel's analysis and basis for concluding the type of supporting organization that your potential grantee is. And then the third method has 2 parts. The first part is to obtain a written representation from the grantee. So a private foundation or a donor advised fund cannot say to the potential grantee, we need to have from you a written representation signed by an officer director of a trustee that describes how the officers, directors, and trustees of the grantee are selected, and for a type 1 or type 2 supporting organization, references the governing document, such as the Articles of Incorporation or the bylaws, establishing the relationship with the supported organization, and for a type 3 supporting organization that identifies the supported organization. If you get this written representation and you have no reason to believe that it's not accurate, you can rely on it. That's what's meant by good faith reliance. And then the second part of method 3 is for the private foundation or the donor advised fund to actually review the governing documents of the supporting organization and the supported organization, which have been provided to you. And in the case of a type 3 supporting organization, to get a representation from the supported organization regarding the types of activities that the supporting organization conducts, and a representation that but for the supporting organization, the supported organization would conduct these activities itself. In practice, method 3 often involves a letter from counsel, because as you can tell, the written representation by the grantee requires an understanding of the technical tax law. So what often happens in practice is the private foundation or donor advised fund says to the grantee, we would like a letter from your counsel explaining what type of supporting organization you are. And then the private foundation or the donor advised fund staff or counsel will review what's received from the grantee's counsel. Note that you cannot rely on Form 990 to determine the type of supporting organization. The IRS has a question about the type of supporting organization, but it does not have confidence that the answers that it is getting are accurate and therefore will not allow grantors to rely on that. So now, continuing with step 3, if the grantee is a non-functionally integrated Type 3 supporting organization, this is kind of one you might think of as, just in your own mind as a bad one or a red flag supporting organization, then the foundation or donor advised fund must exercise expenditure responsibility, and for the foundation, it doesn't count towards the foundation's payout requirement. If the grantee is a Type 1, a Type 2, or a functionally integrated Type 3 supporting organization, then you have one more step that you have to take, and that is to determine whether a disqualified person of the private foundation or the donor has control over the supporting organization or the supported organization. So moving now to slide 24, how do you make this determination? There is no IRS-approved procedure. You use the definition in Notice 2006-109, which I read to you earlier, and is kind of general. But what you need to do is obtain a list of the supported organization or organizations. Then, for a private foundation, you need to identify the disqualified persons. For a donor-advised fund, identify donors and their designees, and then determine if a disqualified person exercises control over the supporting organization or supported organization, and determine if the donor or his or her designees control the supported organization. And remember that it's direct or indirect control. So this is an area that, as I mentioned earlier, is quite difficult because we don't have a lot of guidance. If you do determine that a disqualified person or donor has control, then you must exercise expenditure responsibility, and the grant does not count toward a non-operating foundation's minimum distribution. Now note that you are not prohibited from making these grants, but you have to exercise expenditure responsibility, and in the case of a private foundation, it doesn't count towards your payout requirement. So the grantor, at this point, needs to make a decision of whether it's willing to take on the additional work of expenditure responsibility, and in the case of a private foundation, whether it's willing to make this distribution over and above the distributions that are required by law. So, to sum up, a Type 3 supporting organization, which is not functionally integrated, a grant to such an organization will not count towards a non-operating foundation's minimum distribution, and both foundations and donor-advised funds must exercise expenditure responsibility. In the case of all other supporting organizations, you need to determine whether you have a control situation, control by a disqualified person or a donor, in the case of a donor-advised fund or its designee. And if you do have a control situation, then same thing. The grant is not going to count towards the foundation's minimum distribution, and expenditure responsibility will be required. If it's a Type 1, Type 2, or functionally integrated Type 3 supporting organization, and you don't have a control situation, then you can treat it as a regular public charity, and you can make the grant without any additional requirements under the Pension Protection Act. So with that background, I'm going to turn it back to Pam and let Pam explain how Charity Check works and how it can make the process of complying with these provisions much more efficient and easy.
Thanks, Susie, and again, thank you for all your diligence and guidance. What I want to do now is take a closer look at, again, these two unique due diligence to-dos for you as grantors, and marry them back to those data sources that Susie already alluded to. The first thing we have to do, obviously, is to verify current charitable status, and that is best accomplished by tapping into Publication 78 and its counterpart, the Internal Revenue Bulletin. Number 2, identify supporting organizations with that 509A3 status, and that is best accomplished by tapping into the IRS Business Master File. So I want to take a closer look at each one of those IRS data sources and give you a bit richer background on them. So first of all, the IRS Publication 78, also known as the Cumulative List of Organizations, it basically includes all organizations to which charitable contributions are tax deductible. This repository is actually published quarterly, and its counterpart, the Internal Revenue Bulletin, is published weekly. And the IRB, as it's known for short, actually lists organizations whose charitable status has been changed or revoked. So for obvious reasons, it's important to look at each one of these publications in lockstep. One gives a quarterly overview of the landscape of charitable contributions organizations where charitable contributions are tax deductible, and that IRB, again, pulls out those organizations that have been changed or revoked. I've listed at the bottom of slide 29 the actual reference to the revenue procedure back, I think, in 1982 that solidifies that Publication 78 is the go-to source for that information on charitable status. The second big player here is the IRS Business Master File, and again, that's where we determine 509A status. The Business Master File lists all tax-exempt organizations registered with the IRS, and I think that number in the latest file was up to about 1.7 million organizations. It's published monthly, and it includes information, again, on that 509A status code, which is also called the reason for non-private foundation status. We'll talk more about that when we jump online here in a few minutes. We at GuideStar took a closer look at an IRS Business Master File to more tightly kind of get a handle on the scope of the 509A universe and specifically supporting organizations. And you can see here that those 509A3 organizations, they are a small percent of the pie there, but I think what's most compelling is the second data point here on slide 31, which is upwards of 38% of the largest grant-making foundations did make a grant to a supporting organization. So again, the universe is discrete, but the risk for a misstep is fairly substantive. A quick review of some milestones with the Internal Revenue Code, and certainly I'm not going to start back in 1969, but you can see that from the inception of the Pension Protection Act in 2006 forward, there have been several big machinations, and the key takeaway here is that GuideStar Charity Check has always been fully compliant with each one of those. Most notably, the FAQ that was issued in March of 2007 that stated that grantors could rely on third-party resources like GuideStar to obtain their BMF information and their supporting organization status information. That was formalized into that revenue procedure in June of last year, Revenue Procedure 2009-32, to which Susie alluded earlier. And with that announcement, the community finally had a precedential instrument and statement upon which they could rely. And along the way, again, GuideStar Charity Check has always been fully compliant. Slide 33, I've just listed here an actual direct link to that revenue procedure and put the verbiage on the page. You can certainly peruse that after the session. Now I want to shift gears and talk about all these data sources and what GuideStar actually does with them. So we actually marry but don't modify each one of those data sources. We take that Business Master File, marry that with the quarterly Publication 78 data. We then pull in the weekly Internal Revenue Bulletin data, perform some matching and quality assurance on those data sets, and what we produce is a one-page GuideStar Charity Check report. We do include OFAC verification at the organization level, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And we do have a 9-year track record of working with, consuming, and managing IRS data. So what does the GuideStar Charity Check report deliver? I just want to take a quick moment to look at some high-level anatomy here. The top section of the report is specifically dedicated to Publication 78 details, and again, that is where we will verify current charitable status. The bottom portion of the report focuses solely on the IRS Business Master File details section to, again, at a glance, be able to identify the supporting organizations. Circling back up to the top, every report is always dynamically date and time stamped. We always provide different administrative options for printing either in hard copy or saving electronically via PDF. Jumping into the Pub 78 detail section, we will always list the date of the most current publication 78, as well as the date of its counterpart, that weekly Internal Revenue Bulletin. And down in the Business Master File section, we list the EIN, the date of the most recent monthly BMF, and that all-important reason for non-private foundation status code. And I know that that is a mouthful, but again, that's where we can determine the 509A type of an organization. This is actually a dated example, but one I wanted to show you for a very specific reason and why we actually pull some fields that may seem redundant into this charity check report. So GuideStar actually underwent a name change in late December of 2008. We changed our name from Philanthropic Research, Inc. to GuideStar USA. So because the IRS publication 78 is only published quarterly, that name change did not matriculate through to the January 2009 Pub 78. So you'll see, because we pulled directly from the Pub 78, and we didn't modify any terms, the name in that Pub 78 was the old name, Philanthropic Research, Inc. Moving down to the bottom of the page, you can see in the BMF section that the February BMF did actually pick up the name change to GuideStar USA. So this is a case where grantors need to see those fields from both data sources. It helps grantors raise potential red flags. In this case, I know many of you would probably reach out to the organization to better understand what was going on, or at least consult internally to be sure you were making the distribution to the most appropriate name. So we did mention that charity check is fully compliant with the revenue procedure put forth last June from the IRS, and I want to dissect the requirements of that revenue procedure and marry them back to a GuideStar charity check report. First of all, that revenue procedure stated that the grantee's name, EIN, and reason for non-private foundation status needed to be clearly stated in the report. Obviously, that's the case. You can see that at the bottom right-hand portion of the page. Right behind that, the IRS requires that a statement that the information in the report is basically from the most currently available IRS BMF, inclusive of revision date, and we certainly always include the EIN as well as the revision date in the BMF section of the report. Number 3, that the date and time of the grantor search is included in the report, and again, we have that dynamically generated on all reports. And lastly, that the consumer of the data has the ability to document this either in terms of a hard copy report or via electronic format. And again, we do offer the ability to render both in PDF and to print a hard copy. So that's the compliance angle, and obviously that's important to marry back to your internal compliance practices. So just to recap, again, first thing we have to do is verify current charitable status. That's accomplished by tapping into IRS Publication 78 and its weekly counterpart, the IRB. And to identify those supporting organizations, we need to use the IRS Business Master File. So with that in mind, bear with me as I toggle over to our actual production site, and I'll walk you through a few examples online of how charity check works in practice. So I'm going to begin a search from our home page here. And with charity check, you can enter EINs or actual names of organizations. In this case, I know who I'm looking for, so I'm going to enter the EIN directly via my search. You'll see on this search results page it's about to render that we've done a couple of things for our charity check users. First of all, we've included a color-coded box on the results page indicating Pub 78 status. Right behind that, we've provided a direct link to the charity check report itself. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and click on that link. It's going to save me a few steps here. And this will produce the full charity check report on this organization. So for council and foundations, again, I can see the also known as in this case, since one exists. I can see some easy on-the-eye logo treatments verifying that this is a Pub 78 verified organization. I see the org name, EIN, again, as produced in Pub 78, the actual code and description from Pub 78, the date of the most current IRS Pub 78, and the date of the most recent IRB update for this week. Moving on down that report page, again, I can at a glance see that this is a 509A1 organization, but in more detail, I can again see the EIN, the org name as listed in the Business Master File, the date of the most recent IRS BMS, the IRS subsection code, and again, right here, that reason for non-private foundation status code, which again is that 509A, in this case, A1 status. We also include ruling date on the report and some good links and resources back to the IRS site and revenue procedure and some other good knowledge-based resources for you. So I'm going to take now a look at the second example, which is actually a 509A3 organization. And in this case, again, from the results set, I can see at a glance that this organization is Pub 78 verified. This time I'm actually going to click here and go to the organization's report page just so you can see some different use cases for charity check. And this is a pretty typical GuideStar Premium report page, and what you'll notice is that on the left-hand side of the page we have a persistent charity check pane that's always displayed and for your convenience. This basically gives you the most important details of that charity check report and distills them into a quick at-a-glance view for you. So again, we can see that this organization at a glance is Pub 78 verified. We can see the dates for those document repository checks. And then right behind that, we can see that this organization is a 509A3 based on the March 2010 Business Master File. And from here, we can again run the full report, print the report, or render it in PDF. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do each one of those things today, but you know that that's always a click away from a report page. Just to round out the discussion, I want to also look at a private non-operating foundation, so you can see how that is treated. And we'll look at California Wellness Foundation. And again, at a glance, we can see that they're Pub 78 verified. I'm going to use my quick link here to get to the report. And again, we can see the Pub 78 details here. The code and description, again, states that this is a private foundation. And again, there is no 509A status here because this organization is a private foundation and is outside of the purview of that designation. And then one more example quickly on the OFAC front. GuideStar Charity Check does verify OFAC at the organization level, not at the individual level. And we do that in a couple of places. Most obtusely, you will notice on a results set, immediately this organization is, again, an OFAC designated organization. So we address it off the bat on the results set. And again, within the body of the charity check report, you'll see some very obvious messaging in the header related to its status in the world of OFAC and in the Treasury Department lens, but also you can see how we message organizations that are not in Pub 78 and not in the BMS. So let's jump ahead to some common participant questions. First, I want to talk more about the IRS data sources and manual verification options, and then we'll touch quickly again on the letter of determination. So first of all, Publication 78, the IRS does offer the ability to access that online on their website. I've included that direct link at the bottom of slide 42. Just a couple of caveats and considerations. The database is not searchable by EIN. This does not include IRB weekly updates, so that would involve a separate search and a separate undertaking, probably introducing some risk of manual error along the way. These searches are not date and time stamped. The Internal Revenue Bulletin, again, that weekly counterpart, there is, again, on slide 43, you can see the access point, the link in the footer there. But again, this does not include EIN. It's actually an HTML formatted document, and there's a PDF delivery mechanism as well. It's not searchable. Again, introducing a lot of manual layers into the process. Lastly, the IRS Business Master File. This file does exist. It's a text file on the IRS site. What I've included here on slide 44 is actually the draft of a manual solution recommended by an affinity group that supports the work of Grantmakers. And you can see by manual step 13, they are encouraging their users to search for a 2-digit foundation code that they can only get to by counting forward or backward a certain number of spaces within a very long and dynamic string of text. So certainly this introduces risk for error and misrepresentation of results. Second common question is the letter of determination, is this good enough? And Susie talked briefly about this. Just to reiterate, the letter of determination is static. It confirms 501c3 status at time of issuance. It is not dynamic. It does not include any changes in status since the date of original issuance. Some letters, again, do include supporting organization type. There was that suspension period back in February of 2007, so there's certainly some gaps in the process, and in many cases, those letters are silent as it relates to determining 509c3 status. Next up, we did have some questions submitted in advance. Again, my thanks for doing that. The first one had to do with international grant making. And Susie, would you mind speaking to that for just a few minutes? I know it's a very complex topic, but hopefully you can offer some high-level guidance.
Sure, Pam. As you said, it's a very complex topic. It's one that would probably be worthy of at least 30 minutes in and of itself. But just to kind of give you the high points, if you're making grants to foreign charities, the first thing to ask is whether the foreign charity has an IRS determination letter. Most of them do not, but there are some that have applied for recognition of tax-exempt status and have a letter. And if that's the case, then you can treat them just as you would treat a domestic charity in terms of, for purposes of determining that the grant will go for charitable purposes. You can also treat a foreign charity as a public charity, as if it's a 501c3 organization, if it's equivalent to a U.S. public charity, and if it would qualify for tax-exempt status in the U.S. if it applied. And this is called an equivalency determination. And generally, what you do for this is you would get an opinion of counsel, or if you have in-house people at your foundation who are familiar with the requirements, they could themselves get affidavits from the foreign organization that would have the necessary facts to show that the foreign organization could qualify. This process is, frankly, it's pretty cumbersome, difficult, and can be expensive. There have been some suggestions for having some kind of database so that once an equivalency determination is made for a foreign organization, it wouldn't have to be made again. Right now, each grant maker is making this determination itself. There's some special rules for programs conducted by governmental entities. They are sometimes treated as public charities. And then, as with any grant, whether it's to a foreign organization or a domestic organization, you can always exercise expenditure responsibility, and so that's a permissible route to go. So that's kind of the general high-level view of the tax rules. In addition, since 9/11, the United States government has been very concerned that charities are being used to funnel money to terrorists. Pam, in her presentation, showed one organization that had had its exempt status revoked because it was determined to be providing funds to terrorists. And the Treasury Department issued what it called voluntary guidelines for due diligence in making grants to foreign organizations. And it would take far more time than we have today to go through these, but basically they set forth a number of different actions that a grant maker should take, and generally the amount of due diligence required or suggested varies depending upon the familiarity that the organization has with the potential grantee. So if you are thinking about making contributions to foreign organizations, you should definitely go to the Treasury Department's website, or like most of us, you'll probably start with Google and Google Treasury Department guidelines on international grant making. Become familiar with those guidelines. Also become familiar with the U.S. Patriot Act that is relevant here. That's just kind of a quick overview on a big topic.
Thank you very much. A couple of other questions. Supporting organization types. Does Charity Check include the supporting organization type? If an organization is a 509(c), do you take that next step? And the answer is that data does not matriculate into the Charity Check report. We actually performed an internal analysis and audit of that self-reported information taken directly off of the Form 990 versus the reality of what status that organization truly held, and the error rate was extraordinarily high. Based on that, we were not comfortable inserting a self-reported data element with a known high error rate into the Charity Check report. Actually, many of our users asked that we do not do that. Otherwise, the high level integrity of the report. What I've included on 547 here is just a link to some of the help sheets that the IRS has put forth to help nonprofits and charities determine if, in fact, they are a supporting organization, and if so, what type. Again, a very complex topic, but I wanted to at least give you some insight into the help that is out there for charities to self-assess and self-report. Slide 48 talks a little bit about the advanced ruling process. In September of 2008, it essentially eliminated the advanced ruling process for 501c3 organizations, and it takes the leap of faith and automatically classifies new 501cs as public charities for its first 5 years. How this is translated into the Charity Check experience is that we will still publish the advanced ruling date in the body's report where it exists. We pick that up from the IRS CMS. And then we always provide some footer messaging and conditional footer messaging based on where the advanced ruling date falls for a specific organization. There's some nuances to that. But again, we also provide in that footer a direct link back to the official announcement from the IRS just to make it easy and as seamless as possible. A bit more on OFAC. OFAC is an acronym that stands for Office of Foreign Assets Controls. Again, housed in the U.S. Treasury Department. The information here I thought was very interesting, and this is from the Technology Affinity Group and COF survey in 2007, a bit dated but I think still relevant. Over 300 grant-making organizations were surveyed, and the question was, what kind of OFAC verification software do you use? And you can see a lot were saying none, and a lot were doing some very basic type checks. So it is certainly a space where folks need to be paying attention and perhaps a bit more closely than they are today. A lot of shops have strict internal compliance practices to which they need to adhere, others do not. But if you are not performing OFAC, you might want to look into it or discuss some options with your legal counsel or compliance team. How else can I get Charity Check data? This question came up a little bit as well. And we do offer the same report data, the report data that I showed you online today, we do deliver via XML. And for the non-technologists on the call, XML is just shorthand for extensible markup language. It's basically an easy way to share structured data, in this case Charity Check data, over the internet. So you can see it right what XML looks like, but the bottom line is we can take all of those data fields and deliver them to you over the internet. You can call into the GuideStar database and we will spit back the Charity Check output for a specific EIN or group of EINs, and you can then take that data integrated into your workflow. We have a lot of clients that use Charity Check data. They'll integrate it with their grants management application in-house. or to use it as part of the online application process to verify charitable status up front. So a lot of different applications and executions for this XML data. It is available. Contact us if you'd like to learn more about it. And with that, I see we've run a couple of minutes long, so thank you for bearing with us and for your patience. Scott, any questions in the Q&A log or any common themes of the questions you're seeing that we should be addressing at this time?
There's a couple in here, Pam, that I think participants want to be really sure. They want to confirm some of the compliance things. So if we could go over maybe a couple of these things, some of these things is just kind of a common theme in there. And the first one, if a grant is made to a Type 1 or Type 2 supporting organization that is not controlled by a disqualified person, does it count towards the foundation's minimum distribution?
Yes.
Okay. And another one along those same lines, and I think people just want to be absolutely sure and they want confirmation of things. The question is just to confirm all 509A3 Type 3 non-functionally integrated grants cannot be included in the minimum payout requirement for a private foundation, even if we get expenditure responsibility?
That is correct. If you make a grant to a non-functionally integrated Type 3 organization, you must exercise expenditure responsibility, but it still will not count towards your minimum payout.
Okay. All right. And that's really about that's about it, really, as far as the Q&A. I think that I've gotten some along the way, and those were the only ones that I wanted the absolute subject matter experts to answer.
Great. Well, thank you all again for your time and participation today. We had a very busy session and great participation, so we appreciate your patience with us getting to your questions and to hang in there with us this afternoon. Just a reminder again, if you want more information on GuideStar Premium, which is kind of our research tool, we have a webinar coming up on April 21st, so you can check our website to learn more about that and to register. And again, we will look to get all of you these session materials in the next several days. So Susie, again, my thanks for all of your great insight and wisdom here today. Scott, thanks for manning the Q&A log, and I think we're going to wrap here. So have a great afternoon, everyone.